hard to find a better timing, right, for a conversation about diversity, equity, and inclusion. Just yesterday was Equal Pay Day, which signals the gap of who we are and what we aspire to be as a global society. It also marked the anniversary of national lockdowns to deal with a disruption whose consequences we know have been heterogeneous and skewed toward some groups and demographics. The fact that women have been disproportionately affected responds in part not only to the way organizations deal with differences in the workplace, but how much these differences are acknowledged and understood. We carry out this conversation with one of the best business experts on the topics of diversity, equity and inclusion, and multicultural management that one can learn from these days: diversity and inclusion at iHeartMedia, and the former US multicultural sales lead for Google. Previously, she worked as the national sales managers for Hulu, following 8 years at NBC Universal Telemundo. You know, these women comprise less than 10% of top executives in large companies. Less than 10%. And we have one of them with us today. This one is a first-generation immigrant and an ambassador of Latina Power. Yesenia, I think you cover all the right areas. Welcome to the course.
Thank you so much, Luis, for having me. It's a pleasure to meet everyone on this call. While I wish I could be there in person or in your classroom, I think the ability to do virtual meetings just has made it so much easier for all of us to come together. So I'm grateful for this opportunity. Thank you.
Totally concur with you. Is what I call one of the best silver linings that I can have as a professor, because I can have you. Why don't we start this conversation with a little bit of information about your professional path, a general description of your job, and can you walk us along the key events, the achievements, but also the failures that have brought you to where you are?
Absolutely. And I'll start at the beginning. When I was looking for an internship as I was in my senior year of college. And this may sound very foreign to you guys, because now when you're looking for an internship, obviously technology and the internet makes it so much easier. But when I was going to college, when I was graduating back in 2004, I found this amazing internship opportunity in a newspaper, an advertisement in a newspaper. I picked up the phone and I called. And unfortunately, that class, internship class, was already full. So I had to call the next semester, and lucky for me, I was able to get in. The internship that I was applying for was at a emerging cable network called Mundos. And coincidentally, NBC Universal had just bought Mundos cable network. And so that really allowed Mundos to have more resources, obviously more visibility. And for me as an intern, it gave me an opportunity to walk into the door of an NBC Universal, a major media company. It was a dream come true for me, as you can imagine. You know, going to school, I had so many doubts, self-doubt, you know, am I going to get a job? Am I going to get a great job? Am I going to have an successful career? So being able to intern for NBC Universal was a dream come true for me. Quickly after the internship ended, there was a sales assistant position that opened up at NBCU. I applied, I interviewed, but I got turned down. Another intern mate ended up getting the role that I was applying for. However, she didn't really want to be in sales, so she turned down that role. So since I was the second runner up, I was able to get the role offered to me after I had been turned down. But, you know, I didn't really see that as an obstacle. I was very excited to have my first job out of college, a sales assistant, which is a very exciting opportunity for anyone wanting to get into the media space and into sales. It's an entry level. You're doing a lot of data entry, a lot of client maintenance, and you're just really starting to develop a network of your own. And so that entry into sales was really very defining for me, because after that, I was able to follow along the path of sales planner, account executive, which is a seller. You're, you know, if you're in media, you aspire to be an account executive, because then you can work with top clients. You know, it's a very lucrative career, so you can get paid on commission based on what you sell. So to me, that was an exciting opportunity. Within NBC Universal, I was able to move out to Chicago for about 6 years and really just develop myself as a seller. And then almost 8 years into my career at NBCU, I was recruited to go and work at Hulu. At the time, Hulu was a startup company. It wasn't the Hulu that you guys see today. It was emerging, one of the very first subscription video platforms, online digital video. So to me, that was an exciting career move. With Hulu, I moved back to New York City, and I was able to work there for about 5 years. And then I was having a great time working there. It's an incredibly fun company, startup, digital, very much about, you know, creating your own, you know, your own track. You create your own resources. You kind of, you know, create what you want out of that role. So I had an amazing time doing that at Hulu. But as you will find in your career, you always have to make tough decisions. And even though I was having such a great time at Hulu, I ended up getting recruited to go work at Google. Google was also focusing on multicultural audiences. If you guys know, on YouTube, there's a lot of Latino, Black, Asian creators, LGBT creators. And so we're able to, in my case, sell a lot of that YouTube content. Also on Google, when you're searching, there's a lot of people that search in different languages. So I was able to go in there and sell the Spanish language searches, for example, and anything that had to do with culture. And so that was a great opportunity for me that I really couldn't turn down. So I had to leave Hulu to go work at Google. And although, you know, Google was definitely not as easy as I thought it would be, you know, it's a tech company, definitely different mentality than a media company like NBC, even like a startup like Hulu. It's very established, a lot of process, a lot of people. There's definitely too many cooks in the kitchen, so you had to navigate that. But it was a tremendous learning experience for me, and I lasted 3 years at Google. I take away so many amazing learning experiences. And with that, I was looking for something a little less stressful, a little less intense, and more fun, more dynamic. And so I ended up getting recruited again to go work at iHeart. And with iHeart, if you guys know about iHeart, it's a radio company, but within the last several years, they've been obviously diving into digital, social media, podcasting. And so to me, I had never really done audio or podcasting, and to me represented a huge opportunity to get into that space. So by the time I went to iHeart, I had already covered TV with NBC Universal, cable with NBC Universal, digital video with Hulu, performance marketing, which is a search engine, YouTube. And now, you know, the one thing I wanted to do was audio. And so I moved over to iHeart about 1.5 years ago under the sales capacity, again, multicultural sales. But while in that role, and obviously you guys know what happened in 2020, a lot of conversation about diversity, inclusion, obviously everything that happened within the Black community, and obviously with the unfortunate death of George Floyd, that really opened up a deeper conversation into diversity and inclusion. And because I had been aligned to multicultural audiences, it was a very natural shift for me to start doing diversity and inclusion. And fortunate for me, the Chief Diversity Officer at iHeart really saw something in me and offered to kind of help me develop myself into this new direction, away from sales into diversity and inclusion, which is very different. And I've been doing this role for about two and a half months now. Brand new to the role, but I'm already really enjoying it. And the one thing I love most is the fact that, you know, it's meaningful work. It's really impacting how we drive inclusivity at iHeart, how we tap into more diverse talent, how we create a more engaging space for employees. So to me, it has really deep meaning. And so right now I'm doing that. And, you know, I thinking back in my career and all the self-doubt that I had, I never imagined having this incredible journey. And then if I went to go back into my personal life, I came from the Dominican Republic when I was 11 years old with my family. ESL student, 6th grade, 7th grade, 8th grade, and then high school, I was kind of able to speak English and really defend myself in a new language. I went to school in Staten Island, the CUNY College of Staten Island here in New York. CUNY has about 6 different colleges in each borough. So Brooklyn, Queens, New York, Manhattan, Staten Island, and the Bronx. I went to the one in Staten Island and got a really great education there. And so, you know, looking back, I think definitely when you look at your background and if you have any hesitation or any self-doubt, know that, you know, with people like me and so many others that are able to overcome those obstacles, that anything is really possible in your career. So I throw it back to you, Luis. Hopefully that was not too long of an intro.
No, that was fantastic because it really illustrates the richness of your career. And I like this because I'm going to connect to several of the points that you cover with this. But let's start discussing about what you do now, right? Because now you are formally into equity, diversity, and inclusion, right? But I mean, let's be honest. Given your background, given what brought you to the U.S., what you have experienced in multicultural management, you have been exposed to these topics, right? How and you know, tapping on the richness of your career, going from a TV network, subscription video, tech company to radio broadcasting, is the conversation regarding ethnicity, race, gender, sexual orientation, culture change in these industries, or no so much?
Yeah, if we think about the conversation of diversity from a sales perspective, which was my previous role, you know, multiculturalism in a sales capacity really has to do with understanding consumer behavior. And in that consumer behavior is really all about understanding cultural nuances. So if you are a Hispanic American, you speak Spanish at home, you speak English in school and in the workplace. You are, you know, let's say I'm from the Dominican Republic. I grew up with a lot of the Dominican cultural values and traditions. But now that I live in the United States, it's more about acclimating to American culture while holding on to my Dominican heritage. And so when you're selling in the multicultural space is really telling advertisers and agencies about that richness of cultural nuances and why they need to spend their dollars on Spanish language radio stations, for example, or Spanish language podcast shows, or if you are interested in reaching the Black community, it's about, you know, helping advertisers understand the importance of the Black consumer, the population growth, and where this population is going in the future. If you guys look at US Census data, everything points to multiculturalism really driving population growth in the United States. So Hispanic, Black, Asian are the three segments that are driving most of the population growth in the United States. It has been the case for the last 10, 20 years, and it won't stop anytime soon. In fact, there's a lot of research companies that call these three segments the new majority, because in a very few years, these diverse communities will become the new majority in the United States. So as a seller, it's really understanding all those nuances. What are the traditions that we celebrate? You know, Hispanic Heritage Month, for example, Black History Month. Why is that important to an advertiser? And if you guys paid attention, in February, Black History Month was a huge moment for a lot of brands. Obviously, again, you know, some brands took advantage of the fact that, you know, the Black community was in the forefront of the conversation last year after the unfortunate murder of George Floyd. And they took February as an opportunity to kind of embrace Black culture, embrace Black history, celebrate Black history. Same thing with Hispanic Heritage Month now in coming up in September, October. And so those are just two cultural moments. You know, we also have Pride, you know, Pride Month, which is in June. These are just some examples. And so thinking about from a marketing lens, you know, that's the importance of understanding multicultural consumers. From a diversity and inclusion lens, again, every single company out there, no matter where, what vertical, what category, is really thinking about diversity and inclusion. There's definitely been a lot of missteps when it comes to representation. Luis, you mentioned, you know, only, I think it was 10% of leaders are women in the corporate environment. So think about half of the population is women, female, 50% male, 50% female. Why is it still only 10% of leadership roles are held by women? It should be 50%. And when you dig deeper into ethnicity and race, you know, when you look at the tech space, for example, only 2 to 3% of the workforce is either Black or Hispanic, where, you know, 40% of the US population is multicultural. It should be closer to 40% representation when it comes to Hispanic, Black, and Asian. So there's definitely been a lot of missteps along the way. And coming out of 2020, where there were so many conversations that erupted, along with the Black community, obviously the topic of diversity and inclusion really came to the forefront. And every company right now is focused on this. And if you guys wanted to simplify the diversity term, think about diversity of thought. When you are creating an idea, you're creating it by yourself. If you bring one more person into that idea, then you have a diversity of thought. And then depending on who that idea is for, does it have moms in mind, for example, or dads, or someone from a specific country or specific heritage? Do you have those people represented into that ideation process? And so diversity can be as simple as diversity of thought, just having one additional thought, or gender diversity, ethnic diversity, racial diversity, you know, sexual preferences, people with disabilities. I mean, the list goes on and on and on in terms of how diverse you can be in a topic of conversation. And then when it comes to inclusion, you know, thinking about not only having diverse representation, but also including, you know, other people into the decision-making process, and making sure that, you know, these are stakeholders that have a say, that are accountable as well, that have equity in the game. And so it's a very interesting topic. And for you guys now going through your college education, I think it's something very important for you all to think about, for sure.
Let me build on this last idea and the role of social media and the influence of different stakeholders. And you discuss about what happened last year and how this brought to the table with a different magnitude in terms of the conversation about differences in the workplace, gender, race, and equity in general. One can argue, given the salience, because let's be clear, everyone is talking about these topics nowadays, right? And one can argue that organizations are becoming better on understanding differences of their workforce, their internal stakeholders. But just building on what you said, and we know this, right? Alternatively, a different explanation could be that external stakeholders are becoming more influential. And one way to do that is social media. So it's not that we are increasing efficiency in the workplace, but the stakeholders are more dominant and drive action by business organization. What is your reaction to this?
Yeah, and the thought of stakeholders, when you think about 2020 and the headlines, the news headlines, right? Some of these news channels may be biased, right? They may present the truth in one way, but when you go on social media, you may see the truth in a different way because, for example, a reporter talking about all the protests that happened last year, obviously the people going out in New York City. I live in New York, and people going out to protest George Floyd, Breonna Taylor, everything that happened last year, right? Protesting. Some may call it looting, right? If you are affected by any of these issues, you may say, no, we're protesting. We have a right to protest. You take on social media and you share your own personal point of view. That's the influencer aspect, the fact that the news is coming from an authentic source, someone that actually went through, let's say, police brutality, or another topic that is currently, happening in this country. And so you can either look at the news outlet, you can look at, let's say places like Facebook, for example, or YouTube, and look at the influencers that are out there reporting the news or sharing their own perspective. And I think what became louder than the news sources were actual people, talking and speaking up about violence, speaking up about, unfair behavior, speaking up about unfair pay, speaking up about experiencing racism in the workplace or everywhere, right? And so the influential piece of it is something that can be dismissed. I know I was definitely looking for that authentic content, right? Hearing from people that actually have gone through something like that. And so kind of like taking pieces from different places and really creating your own point of view. And so I think that's really the difference that social media has made. It really has allowed people to create the content that they don't see anywhere else. In the case of YouTube creators have, started to create videos because they were looking on their TV channels, cable channels, and they were not really seeing, for example, a lot of Black beauty creators, talking about natural hair routines. That's content that you can't really find on TV very readily, but on YouTube, there's thousands and thousands and thousands of hours covering Black hair care routines, right? Or, talking about specific cultural, cultural moments, cultural nuances. And so the creators are really owning those conversations. It's no longer up to the cable networks, even the radio stations to talk about these things. We're taking ownership. Same thing in the podcasting space. I see the podcasting space as an area where people are just sharing their voice, unfiltered, not curated. It's just really sharing your point of view on the microphone. And so the podcasting space has really been embracing that as well. And so the social media influence has really, really, really brought to the surface everything that we're living today in terms of diversity and inclusion. The corporate environment is people speaking up about not getting paid what they deserve, or experiencing racism in the workplace. I know you guys saw a lot of statements made from different companies and employees. And so it's definitely a very different landscape. People are more empowered. We want to end any type of unfair treatment or any type of racism or bias, right? So we have to speak up about it. And so I think that the power is really on us now.
Let me stress this point because I'm trying to think about the complexities of implementing these policies, right? And in an effective way in the workplace, because there's a fundamental paradox in improvements in equity, diversity, and inclusion in companies, because inclusion means to recognize the uniqueness and identity of each employee. But the ability of the smaller companies to compete in the global market has in the last years has been possible in a great part because of the ability to standardize organizational processes. And diversity might prove to be too costly for these organizations, and particularly in certain industries. And we know there are studies that show that diversity might be value destroying for companies. So, do you think that this is a phenomenon that is mostly fueled by large affluent companies? What is your take about that?
So you're saying in terms of making the case.
Yeah, the ability of smaller companies to really have a similar stance. And this is so important, right? Because at the global level, 75% of the workforce is employed by smaller companies, small, and medium companies. So if we really want to see substantial change and systemic change, we need to bring these organizations to the table. As a business owner of a medium company, I give my own experience. Is really costly to implement these policies. So let's be realistic with this. What is your take about that?
Yeah, I think when it comes to implementation, it's definitely a challenging process. If you think about the largest companies out there, right? And if you're a large company, let's say, for example, Chase Manhattan Bank, and I'm just kind of using that as an example. Chase Manhattan Bank has been around for many, many, many decades. Let's say they never thought about leading with diversity and inclusion, thinking about workforce representation across all the major groups, creating inclusive policies so that employees of color feel included, feel like they have equity. And so creating inclusivity, right? And so now Chase Manhattan Bank in 2021, they have to backtrack decades and decades and decades of legacy. And let's say there's a leader there or several leaders there that have been around for 20, 30 years. It will be a lot more challenging to convince those leaders to embrace, welcome diversity and inclusion than it is to convince a newer employee who maybe is a little younger, maybe more open because this employee is more aware of the challenges. Maybe this employee is someone of color and is personally affected by a lot of these policies. So dealing with the legacy is a huge challenge that many companies need to tackle, right? And again, I'm just using Chase Manhattan Bank as one example. I have no experience with Chase, so I just want to say that. But dealing with the legacy is one challenge, very costly to your point, to go back and convince every single leader that they need to embrace diversity because X, Y, and Z, not just because of the business case, but because you want to make sure that you're embracing your employees differently. And so it's challenging from that perspective, it's costly from that perspective. And so the influence that Chase Manhattan Bank can have, not only in the finance industry, but all around, now we're seeing a lot of smaller banks, for example, catering to minority groups, specifically catering to minority groups. They have the ability to kind of do things differently and maybe better because they're newer. And so it's a huge challenge, but not dismissing the influence that large companies can have in the diversity and inclusion space. And I can give you one example. Procter & Gamble, who is the creator of household brands like Tide, Crest, a lot of different household products that we use, they are a leader in diversity and inclusion. Their probably the top advertiser worldwide. And so P&G has been directly speaking to the Black community for many, many decades, the Latino community for many, many decades. They think about sustainability and the impact to the environment. You know, they lead with a lot of these initiatives. And so if Procter & Gamble can influence other brands, that could be a huge, huge, huge game changer, right? And so that's what they're trying to do. And so, you know, the impact of influence is super important. And every single one of us in this room, in this virtual room, has the power to always challenge the norm, ask questions, demand more. We really have no choice, but we can't stay silent anymore. And so depending on how the different issues affect you, whether it is, you know, you want to see a more gender balanced classroom, you want to see more diversity in terms of race, ethnicity in the classroom, the topics that you're talking about in class, what do you want to see, right? How you want to be represented, how you want others to be represented is very key. You have to speak up.
Precisely, speaking up, I'll give the opportunity to my students to connect with you directly.
Perfect.
Sanjana.
Hi, I had a question that like it's kind of going off of like not what we spoke about, but you talked a lot about how you're in sales. So I'm like interested in marketing and I have had a little bit of background in sales. So like I would like to go in that route too. My question would be like more for COVID, especially with iHeart. Have you like seen any like challenges with regarding sales for iHeart, or actually like have you seen it go in a positive direction now that people are more like inside and listening to podcasts and have more like free time? Like what has the direction been? And now that like things are starting to get better again with the vaccine out, like what do you think the direction is going to go? Like I understand you're in a different sector right now, but like how has it been and where do you see it going?
Yeah, and that's a really great question. And while we were on lockdown last year, I was still in my sales role, so I can speak to it. So when you think about advertising on TV, on radio, on social media, on digital platforms, essentially every single platform was affected by COVID. However, think about television, for example. We were all home watching content, either watching the news or like trying to distract ourselves. I know that, for example, my streaming behavior on Netflix skyrocketed 1,000% because I was just home trying to binge watch series that I had never had the time to do, right? So television viewing surged, which meant advertisers were taking advantage of that opportunity on the television side. On the other hand, radio, some of the radio behavior involves people in their car driving to school, driving to work, listening to the radio because no one was going to work or barely anyone was going to work, and you know, with the exception of essential workers. The radio listening declined slightly, so advertising on radio declined. Additionally, a lot of advertising that happens on radio is local advertising, with a lot of the local businesses closed and shut down. None of those local businesses were advertising on radio. So a lot of that spend definitely declined. On the other hand, the podcasting side surged for us. Just like people are looking for content on TV, people are looking to binge watch podcast content on audio. And so our radio business declined, our podcasting business surged, our digital business surged. So it kind of balanced. Another thing that happened was the events business. iHeart does about 20,000 different events every single year. So things like, I don't know if you guys have heard of Jingle Ball, which is a holiday concert series, canceled. Things like iHeart Festival, canceled. Country Festival, canceled. And so a lot of the revenue from an events piece declined significantly, but we were able to make up for it with virtual experiences like HBCU Homecoming, which is an event that we have, the commencement ceremony, which is a virtual event that we did for the first time last year, Can Council Pride, another cultural event that we did last year. And so we're able to sort of balance, and I feel that every media company was in the same position. If you were declining in sales or ratings, you are challenging yourself to figure out how can you make up that revenue. Things have definitely been bouncing back. I want to say normal levels. I think advertisers, they need to run on media in order to drive sales. And so now that things are going back to normal, the vaccine is definitely more accessible to people. I think that's things will go back to normal fairly soon. For someone wanting to get into sales, you should know that sales is an exciting career. I highly, highly recommend advertising, sales, and media, but it is one of those careers where you have to be okay with ebbs and flows, ups and downs, roller coaster. One year you're having a great year, you're getting paid out very well, commission-wise. The next year it might be a pandemic. It might be a major event that affects your ability to sell more. So you just have to be comfortable with that, with that up and down and roller coaster behavior. And, I can say that throughout my sales career, which spans about 17 years, I rarely had a really, really bad year. Sales is all about developing relationships, knowing your product, and being consistent. And so if it's a career that you're interested in, along with marketing, I think it's an exciting space for you.
Thank you.
You're welcome. Samir, you have a question?
Yeah, I was giving you applause for your answer, but I do have a question. So, great job today, Yesenia. I really liked all your answers. But my question is I know for me, I like to think about how people's personal histories kind of influence who they are professionally, but also who they end up becoming. And I know you touched on and alluded to like your youth coming to the US, being from the Dominican Republic, and things of that nature. And I was wondering, like, in what ways do you kind of leverage your own diverse background when you go and make diversity and equity and inclusion initiatives? And, how do you use that perspective in not only your work, but maybe like in a meeting? And with regards to that, how do you sort of teach people like the emotional intelligence necessary to make D&I work? So
yeah, that's a two great questions. I applaud you for that. So the first question, how do I leverage my cultural background to lead in these diversity initiatives? Definitely a must. Reason why, let's say you are in a room and the people in the room are, let's say, white, male, let's say, for example. I'm the only female with a cultural background. They may want to do, let's say, an advertising campaign or an advertising initiative, marketing initiative that only has their point of view as white males, right? But I'm the Latina female and I can say, listen, this could work, but you are forgetting about this part of the population that may be interested in that. Or you are missing these two things or three things that can make this more exciting because I have a unique point of view. The more perspectives you have in the room, the stronger your ideas will be. One example that I always use, I'm a woman, I'm not a mother, so I would never be able to make decisions for mothers or create campaigns that are focused on mothers because I don't have that unique perspective. So to me, I'm like, I need to get some mothers in the room to help make these decisions and decisions that are authentic and that are going to resonate. And so the more perspectives you have, the better you'll be. That's why research shows that diversity drives results, because anytime that you're in a room and you only have people surrounded, let's say if I were in a room full of Dominican women or men, we only have that we only have that very limited perspective. But if we had, let's say, people from other parts of Latin America, then the perspectives become stronger. If we had people from other areas of the world or other race and ethnicities, then the perspective is very different. So always coming from the place of, actually you're forgetting about this one point. I don't know where you're from, but, always drawing inspiration from what you experience, because you can't expect people from other countries or even other races and ethnicities to really understand what you experienced or where you came from, right? You kind of always have to add that perspective. And then the second question, which was, I forget what the second question.
how do you teach people the emotional intelligence to make D&I work?
That's a great, yeah, that was my favorite part. You know, one of the things that I really take pride in my career is having that emotional intelligence. And it's something that's lacking a lot in corporate America. So I don't know if it's something that you can teach. I think it's something that you're either born with or something that you have to really work really hard to notice. You'll notice, especially like in the tech space, as an example, and I don't mean to, you know, I don't mean to speak badly about anyone, but in the tech space, you're dealing with, let's say, a lot of engineers who focus on the data, on the facts, right? They care less about the expression on your face. If you're having a bad day, they're like, we're getting to business, we're working. Less about how are you feeling today? How can I help? You know, is everything okay? That's the emotional aspect of it, right? And so when you're a leader, you are supposed to have this emotional intelligence because you're leading a team. You have to be that person that walks into a room and can read a room. Let's say you're doing a presentation and people are not interested in your presentation and you carry on and you share that presentation, nobody cares. Obviously, you want people to care about what you're talking about. So you have to read the room. How's everyone doing? Are we ready to do this? Is there anything I can do to address anything before we get into this presentation? This is what I prepared, but do you guys have something else in mind? You always have to just practice, because the same way that you want people to care about what you're feeling, what you're going through, what you're experiencing, you should care about the other person as well. And always think about, you know, let's say a very simple example. I'm on a 5-hour flight, right? I'm going to get hungry, right? I'm not the only one that's going to get hungry. Everybody's going to get hungry on that flight. Everybody's going to want to use the bathroom in that flight. Everybody is going to get cranky, tired. I'm ready to get home. Like, I'm not just the only one. So always having that perspective that you're not the only one that's hungry. You're not the only one that probably needs something. And always kind of like, you know, asking the questions and again, hopefully something that you can teach, but if you can't teach it, definitely just stay always aware, be self-aware, be very self-aware in your career. And I think that really has made a difference for me.
Thank you, Jose. I think Jose was raising, and then Natalia, Bigay, and Elena.
First of all, thank you, Yesenia, for coming today. So my question was, you touched a bit about the fact that there are lower numbers of Hispanics and Blacks in the workforce relative to the population. Would you say that a big factor that's because the fact that a lot of those communities and ethnic groups were not grown up in a background where they may be interested in those types of industries? As a supporter of diversity and inclusion, what would you do in the long term to actually convince these people to actually join the industry and show them like the benefits of being a part of it?
Yeah, those are great questions, Jose. And the first question, I think what has happened, and I can speak from my personal experience, there's one main differentiating factor when it comes to diverse candidates, right? And I'm a diverse candidate. And again, going back to my experience, I went to school. I was an immigrant, right? Immigrant student. My parents didn't have a college education, so they couldn't really guide me into what that process could be like. They didn't have any connections in the industry. They didn't have any mentors they can point me to or coaches they can point me to. So the mentorship aspect is something that is lacking in our community. And so when it comes to graduating college and finding those work opportunities, what gets in the way of our success is not having access to those mentors. You know, in my case, not having parents that could guide me in that direction. Whereas people that, you know, other groups where maybe you went to a better school, maybe you have someone in the industry that can get you in, someone that can mentor you and tell you exactly how to write a resume, a cover letter, how to create a LinkedIn profile. You know, there's less of that happening. And so that's why I encourage everyone here, if you know more, help others who may need the help, right? Because you don't know how people have access to those mentors. And so now that I'm in this position, those are the things that I look for, right? I'm less interested in a perfect written resume and more about what was the journey that you had to go through to put yourself through college, to find this opportunity. Tell me about your character. And I think when we start to embrace that in corporate America versus what school you went to, what does your resume look like? How many internships did you do? What jobs did you do before getting this entry-level role? And who connected you to me? You know, there's a lot less in our community, unfortunately. And so for all of us to tackle this, right? If you know how to write a resume better than the next person, make sure you're helping those other people coming behind you. And for me, it really is just the second question is really just consistently speaking up and showing the leaders that work with me how they may have a different privilege than the groups that we're talking about or the groups that we're trying to support, and creating a different POV and creating more opportunities for those people to be represented, for those voices to be represented. And so, in the workplace right now, there's a huge focus on diversity and inclusion. And for all of you guys now looking to graduate and looking to finish up your college career, definitely think about, how you want to position yourself. What are the things that you're lacking? Reach out to mentors, reach out to people that can help you. You don't have to do it alone. And although I did it on my own, I didn't have any mentors early on. I had a few people that helped me get in the door. I did it on my own, and looking back, I wish I would have reached out sooner to people that were around me. When you get into a company, find those people that have emotional intelligence, reach out to them, ask them for help if you need the help. And so I think that those things are very critical.
And then I think Big A.
Thank you so much again for coming and speaking with us. My name's PK. I'm a sophomore at GW. And my question, it's so funny because I'm taking a human capital class right now, and a lot of what we're talking about today is connecting to that course. And we learned when it comes to D&I, there's always a values case and a business case for why any company would choose to care at all. And I guess I was just wondering if you could expand, or I'm just curious about how you guys at iHeart are making sure that you're not only approaching things from a business case and not just doing it strictly for profit. Like, how is DE&I ingrained in your culture, and how your organization works?
Yeah, that's a great question. It's really nice to meet you. So I would say, we're very much still in the beginning phases of developing our D&I roadmap. But one thing that we constantly point back to is the fact that our audience base is so diverse. We have over 850 radio stations across the entire US. And so think about 850 radio stations across every single state, city, local market. And within those local markets, we reach, Black listeners, Hispanic listeners, Asian, LGBT, everyone, right? And so when we have such a diverse audience base, we need to reflect that internally with our employees. The talent that we hire, talent like the Breakfast Club, for example, Steve Harvey, Enrique Santos was one of our Latino hosts, the podcast content that we're curating. We just formed the Black Information Network, which is a 24-hour news network focused on Black news. We have all of the critical components to create a great D&I plan, right? But if our employees don't feel that we stand for what we offer externally, then we're just only setting ourselves up for failure, right? And so it really is about making sure that we are reflecting the communities we serve, that the content that we are putting to the forefront is authentic, not only because of the people that are creating the content, but because the employees internally feel that this is authentic to them. So for us, it's really about creating an inclusive culture, making sure that we are reflecting that rich diversity in the United States. And we're at the very beginning point, which is the most exciting point, because we can only go up from here, right? And so above and beyond the business case, you always have to identify the business case. And for us, in order to be an innovative company, a competitive company, we have to dig into diversity. Every single company right now is focused on diversity, and those who do not will be very obvious. And as you guys start to look for new jobs, and you'll see, and you're start asking those questions, what do your diversity numbers look like? And if they don't have a good answer for you, maybe like, well, I don't want to work for you, right? And so it's all about that. And besides the business case, we want to make sure that we are a fun company to work for, that people want to work here, they want to stay here, they find themselves represented, they have equity. And so it's really just about aligning yourself with where everything is going in the future. So that's a great question.
Yeah, thank you for that. And I feel like, because I was just worried, because I see a lot of companies nowadays are really pushing diversity efforts. And I wonder, people that are in positions like you are blessed to be in, how do we make sure that companies are doing it for the right reasons?
Right. Yeah.
Yeah. So I appreciate that.
It definitely is a healthy dose of speaking up and, you know, again, challenging the norm. It's all about challenging the norm. And, you know, when you see these decisions being made for the wrong reasons, you have to speak up and say, actually, we need to do it this way instead, right? And I only hope to be that influential, right? So that I can continue to influence those decisions. But it is a tough journey for sure. But it's a fun journey for sure too.
Thank you.
Natalia?
Okay, hi, it's really nice to meet you. Thank you for joining us today. So my question had to do with, like, if you were in our position and you wanted to pursue a sales career, like, where would you start? Like, how do you know if you have that emotional intelligence you were talking about? And it's like such a broad market and there's so many like options. Being in our position, where would you suggest we should start, or like look for internships? Like, what kind of companies, what should we focus on? I think this has to do a lot with Jose's question, but if you would give like one like advice to us, like on where to start our sales career, or how to like notice if we want to pursue that career or not, what would it be?
That's a great question. It's so nice to meet you too. So what I always tell my mentees is, no matter what career you want to go into, know that there are a lot of options. Media is massive. You think about media companies, ABC, NBC, CBS, Fox, but then you also think about tech companies, Google, Twitter, Reddit, to name a few, Spotify, to name a few. You think about brands like P&G, Kellogg's, Ford. This industry is massive, right? So you want to start with organizing your thoughts. Is it a company that you really enjoy? Let's say you want to get into sales at NBC. Do you like the NBC content? Do you enjoy what you see from NBC? Or do you hate NBC? If you do hate NBC, why would you apply to a job there, right? And so you start to kind of organize your thoughts around media companies, tech companies, brands, social media networks. Let me see what those companies have to offer. For sales, the entry level for sales is sales assistant, or in some cases, sales planner, account manager, analyst. And so you want to look for those roles. You want to look for internships within those media companies. You express an interest in sales. If you get in there, you express an interest in sales. You start talking to people who are doing it, people who are actively, you know, finding success in sales. Let's say you get into one of those roles. You know, one mistake that people make is thinking, I got into this, I need to stay here. This is the only way for me. This is the beginning of your career. Nothing is permanent. I encourage you all to have fun with this process. Don't get bogged down by thinking you're making permanent decisions. You find a role, you enjoy it, great, you continue. You find a role, you don't enjoy it, give it some time, at least a year, to really try it. If you don't like it, it's okay to move to another thing. Sales, I find that sales is either a yes or a no for people. I give you the example of my brother. To me, he was a great seller. He was natural, relationship driven, amazing, but he hated it. So while I wanted him to stay in it because I really believed in his potential, he was like, I hate it, I don't like it, I'm out. And so it's okay to figure out that you like it or not. Like, this is the beginning of your career. It's the most exciting. And, you know, again, it's like some people are very loyal to specific companies. I'm not a fan of that loyalty because I think the more experiences you have, the stronger person you become professionally. So even though I could have stayed at NBC because to me they were family, I was having fun, I enjoy the company, I enjoy the people, I could have stayed there until now, 20 years into it. But I'm like, no, I need to experience more. So then I went to Hulu. And Hulu was an amazing experience. It was so much fun. I could have worked there my entire life. But I'm like, no, I need to try something else. Google was great. I didn't love it, but I tried it 3 years and it ended up making me stronger. So I encourage you guys to have that like journey mentality. This is a journey. This is not a destination. I'm going to have fun. I'm going to enjoy. I'm going to experience. I'm going to network. I'm going to learn. And you guys are going to have an amazing, amazing time. If you think about it, and I know I'm long-winded, you're working, let's say 40 or 45 years of your life, and to hold a job that you're just complacent with just because, you don't need to do that. Experience and like make this 40, 45 years the best of your time. And it's a fun career.
Yesenia, talking about time, this session ends at 2 p.m., but I'm going to ask you this because this has been a widely popular session. Thanks. Could you stay a few minutes later?
Yes, I can.
Right. Okay. And then I have a few people, I have people that want to ask you questions, and I want to ask them who has to go. Is there anyone that has to raise your hand? Raise your physical hand, your real hand, if you have to go. Okay. And then, okay, I'll call you later, Jose. I know that you have to go, but let me give an opportunity to others. And so I'll continue with the order. Elena, right? Elena.
Yeah, so my question is, did you have doubts about starting to work at Hulu, which you said which was a startup company at the time? And did you take further precautions because it was a startup company?
Sorry, that's a great question. And this is my favorite story to tell because I did have so much fear and doubt going to Hulu. First of all, you know, think about, I spent 8 years at NBC. I knew everybody. It was my family. So breaking away from that was very hard. Second, you know, I had stability at my job. I was doing well, performing, love my manager. I had really no reasons to leave. And then when the startup company comes and knocks on my door, you search it and you're like, ooh, nobody knows what Hulu is. Nobody knows what this is. Like, what is Hulu? What's the future for this? They were at the moment like trying to get funding, and I didn't really know about that whole world. But you know, what I did know was that digital was popular. It was becoming an increasingly big topic in my industry. And so I knew that if I were to go digital, like that could be a really great place for me. The day that I resigned from Telemundo, my manager didn't want to let me go, and he enlisted all the senior leaders to come and talk to me and try to convince me to stay. And so I was literally like heartbroken about the whole decision, and I almost turned it down. And then the deciding factor was NBC didn't offer me to pay me more, and Hulu was offering to pay me more. And so one day I just snapped out of it and said, wait a minute, NBC's not offering me to pay me more money, but Hulu is. Even for that, I'm leaving, I'm going. And so I decided to leave. I moved back from Chicago to New York. And my first day at Hulu, I walk in and there was like, they were building the office, like they were building up walls and cubicles. It was just a disaster. My heart sank because I was immediately afraid. I'm like, what did I just do? Going from like a fancy building in Chicago to like this, for lack of a better term, you know, disaster zone. But, you know, once you get once you get rid of that fear and knowing that even if this fails, it's going to be okay. Even if like the next day I had to leave for some reason, I knew that I had a family that could support me. I knew that I had experience. I knew that I could go back to NBC if I wanted to. And so you just have to always constantly, combat that fear. And like, one of my favorite influencers posted this on social media recently. And she said, our minds are unlimited when it comes to thoughts of negativity. Think about how long you can go thinking something bad is going to happen versus how much energy you put into visioning the best outcome or the best possible outcome. If we were to reverse that and just think positive, positive, positive versus negative, 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 we could do so much. And so you always think just everything's going to be okay. And I never wanted to get too complacent, or after that experience, I knew my loyalty was limited to these companies because my purpose was to continue learning and growing and just becoming better. And so you always have to just think about that and when you're making those decisions for yourself.
Talia?
Thank you so much for coming and talking to us today. Like, I really enjoyed listening to you and the way you talked and answered the questions. I had something more about, like, in your time working, have you ever experienced some sort of racism or anything against you? Because, like, for example, I am an Arab, right? And so a lot of times I get asked questions like, either people have they assume things like that I'm from an underdeveloped country, or like someone once asked me if I rode camels to school, and I was honestly like really offended by that because that's not, I don't know how you've handled those situations, and like if you, for example, saw someone do that, how would you handle that too as like a manager or a leader?
Yeah, and that's a great question, Talia. The level of ignorance in some people is just unimaginable. I'm sorry that you had to hear that type of comment. Now that I'm older, more experienced, I'm more comfortable addressing when those things happen. I wouldn't say that I've been a victim of like very bad situations or like comments like that, but people do have unconscious bias and they say things that are offensive to you depending on where you're from, what your preferences are. And so that happens all the time. And while the first time you address it, it may be very, very uncomfortable, the more comfortable you get addressing it in a way that is constructive. In the case of you, like the person that mentioned that thing about the camel, you can say, why would you assume that? Or have you done your research on people who are from my country? I think that's a very stereotypical comment to make. I think it makes you look really bad. Like, take the power back, and this is not on you, this is on them. And I think with diversity and inclusion, I think it's really about checking people in a way that it's constructive, because we're all on a journey, and I want to believe that sometimes people have good intentions, but the way they say things is the wrong way. So assume good intentions and just address it head on. You're going to be stronger for it. You're going to feel so good about it, and it won't happen to anyone else, at least from that person.
Oh, thank you so much for your answer.
You're welcome.
Lisa? Or Lisa?
Hi. Thanks again for coming to speak with us today. So my question is, that first time you picked up the phone to call for that internship, what do you think set you apart from the other candidates?
Nothing. I was probably very rough around the edges. I was actually writing a piece about my career journey, and I was reflecting back on those moments. My resume was a disaster. I had no references, probably. I literally just saw the ad. I called and they told me, we're full this semester, call again next semester. They probably thought I wasn't going to call, but I remembered and I called and I got in. I think it was just the consistency of it, the fact that I spoke to the same person and he remembered that I had called the prior semester, that I showed up and I looked sort of professional. obviously I did my research. I looked into what the network was. I looked into the position. I had been taking classes in the field and communications and grassroots marketing. And so I had met the qualifications, but I think it was just the consistency of it and maybe displaying the interest and understanding what I wanted to do and why. But I have to say, I didn't really have anything special that I can think of. But again, you know, thinking back at my resume, it was not a good resume. Probably my cover letter had spelling mistakes in it. I mean, it was just, you know, not the ideal situation, which is why I go back to, I'm now that I'm in this position and I'm interviewing people left and right, it's really more about the character and, you know, the conversation versus what's on paper. And, you know, obviously I don't want to discourage you from having a great resume, having a neat cover letter, you know, making sure that you're checking your spellings before you send that email. You want to do all those things because right now there's so much more competition. You want to make sure that you cover that at least. But when you're showing up to an interview, it's, you know, make it compelling. Why is someone interested in talking to you? Why is someone interested in learning about your journey? It's less about the generic answers and more about like the deep insight that you have into that role. Did you research the company? Have you looked at the latest trades? Do you have a personal story to tell? You know, those things are far more interesting to me, at least, than looking at a resume.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
And Logan.
My question was kind of related to work-life balance. And I was curious, having worked at big corporations in big cities, if that's something that's been difficult at any times, or if you kind of have like now that you have all this experience, and like you said, there's always another opportunity, if there's like ever a limit for yourself on like, this is how much I'm willing to give a company. And if that's not enough, then I'm gonna, you know, then like or like if it's been easy to not let your work in any of these huge corporations become like your life.
Yeah, that's a great question, Logan, and a very important question because we all see headlines about work hard, put in the hours, but what is that doing to your emotional, mental health? You know, for me, yes, there were times when, let's say when I was a sales assistant, I remember one day I was going on vacation and I worked until like 3 a.m. for the whole entire week, but because I wanted to be disconnected when I was on vacation, right? You have to set those boundaries. You know, you have to set those boundaries early on, having that communication with your manager and saying things like, I will give you my all, but I have this that I have to attend to. I have these things that I need to prioritize in my life. You know, being comfortable with having those conversations. I think employees now are really understanding that, especially in the tech space. While the tech space is very fast-paced, very intense, I think they recognize the need for mental space, for emotional space. And so you need to just set those boundaries. In sales, there have been times where I've traveled extensively every week on, you know, going to meetings in the West Coast, in Chicago, everywhere. And that can really, you know, cause a lot of stress, physical stress, emotional stress. But you know, as I got older and I just basically knew how to manage those conversations, I set boundaries for myself. So then it became about, I'm not traveling during the weekends because the weekends are my time. I'm traveling Monday morning, even though that means I'm missing the first 3 hours of Monday morning. I don't care. This is travel time. This is work time. That's when I'm doing it. Like, you start to feel more comfortable setting those boundaries, but always recognizing that you have to set those boundaries. Even if you feel like, well, this may affect how competitive my peers are. And maybe I look less competitive because I don't work on weekends. Maybe I don't respond to emails at 11 p.m. Maybe I don't respond to emails at 6 a.m. You have to set those boundaries for yourself. And I've never been the type to be like so competitive that I let my work control my entire life. I'm very much about family comes first, my emotional state comes first, work comes second or third. You know, you just have to know how to balance that. But now that you guys are so young and like in charge of your future, just because you're starting your careers, always thinking about that and what are you willing to sacrifice versus not versus what you're not willing to sacrifice? It's a very good question.
And very good advice. Thank you. Bigger, you want to close in the session, please?
Yes, I have a question. I'm going to try to phrase it so it doesn't seem too trivial, but I am really curious to see how it's loosely related to diversity and inclusion, but I'm curious to hear your opinion about like how companies, certain like regulations like no tattoos or like head wraps and things that might be important or a part of some people's cultures. Like, how do you think that's gonna, like, over time, companies are gonna adopt maybe like looser regulations about things like that? I hope I'm making sense.
Yeah, no, that's a great question. And I'm sure you've seen some articles written about, let's say in the school environment, boys being asked to take down their dreadlocks in the sporting teams. Like, it's been all over the news. It's a huge, huge topic. I want to toss it back to you. If you go through an interview and you're displaying things of yourself that you really love and you want others to embrace and, part of your identity, whether it is a tattoo, a certain hairstyle or certain clothing, I was having this conversation with this young lady who is from Egypt and she wears a hijab. And so there's a huge topic around that. And for women who wear hijab, they see this as a huge barrier to getting jobs because they immediately get like stereotypes into, specific things, right? And so what I say is, would you want to work for an employee who doesn't embrace your individuality? Probably not.
Yeah.
So you just keep it moving. If you notice any type of facial expression or comment or like, well, you have to dress differently or you have to do your hair different, you don't want to work for that employee. Yeah. You do not. Yeah. And, I've seen in the tech space is much better about this in other companies. Mm-hmm. I do see individuality being embraced, hairstyles, tattoos, clothing. The tech space is a lot more open from that perspective. Mm-hmm. Media companies have to, catch up to that. I remember NBC is all about wearing a suit, having your hair in a specific way, specific shoes. They have to catch up to the fact that I now hate wearing suits. As soon as I left NBC, I donated all my suits. So, you have to be that empowered person that knows better, what works better for you. And if you sense any type of commentary, you don't want to work for that company. There's other companies that you can work for. And that's what I always tell my mentees. Sometimes we're so focused on like the big, huge, successful companies, but those successful companies may not be the best for us because our interests are different. Our priorities are different. There's so many options. Like, don't let yourself work for someone that doesn't embrace who you are.
Okay. Thank you. Good advice.
You're welcome.
So, thank you so much for this session, Yesenia. But and let me explain what happens. I have 3 sections, and this is complicated for my students in the other sections to come to this one section, right? And I appreciate so much that. But at some point, they have to jump into another class, and that's the reason that we have fewer people now. But we are recording the session, and I want you to say something about this because. At the same time that we have more than ever this conversation about differences, any type of difference, we see around the world many expressions of the opposite thing that are basically represented by ethnic nationalism, by economic disintegration, by discrimination in general. Of all times, I'm a girl dad, right? And I have 2 little daughters, and worry about that. I worry about my students. What do you have to say about it? Do you see hope in the future? Because 2021, we're still discussing about these topics, and we're still dealing with a massive gender gap. For Latinas, for instance, is huge, right? 51%. So give us some hope.
Yes, I think there's definitely a lot of hope in the future. You know, the fact that I'm in this role at iHeart, D&I role, that didn't exist a year ago. So for me, I see hope from that perspective, but I do see hope across corporate America. There's been a huge reckoning, especially after last year. You know, as painful as last year was, it did open a lot of eyes and a lot of ears. And I find that people are more open. Obviously, you know, we're not going to solve the gender gap anytime soon, the race and ethnicity gap anytime soon. It's a journey, right? We just have to take active part. You know, going back to your question, Bige, you know, it's really about taking control and not allowing companies to control who we are, what we do, what we want. In the past, it was all about landing that amazing job at this big company, and people stay there for 20, 30 years. Even though they were not very happy, they stay there. Now it's all about options, taking control of your career. You know, who are you? What's your brand? What do you stand for? How do you challenge the norm? How do you bring others along? How do you help create that next generation, right? And so I do think that we're a lot more powerful, I should say empowered, than we were before, but we have to be an active participant in that. It's, you know, it's like speaking up when you see the need to. Obviously, I'm a big fan of speaking up in a way that is going to be constructive versus, you know, creating more tension. Like, you have to be open to listening and sharing and kind of like agreeing, right? So we just have to become active participants for things to get better. Nothing's going to happen in corporate America if people like me are in there and are not doing our part to make things better and challenging our co-workers to do better and challenging everybody to think differently and to be more open. In the classroom, you guys have the power to dictate what you want to learn. With you, Luis, you know, asking for those topics that you want covered, you know, sharing feedback. In our households, it's all about not just going with what you know, is like with what you've been brought up with. Is like, let me introduce different habits. Like, maybe there's different ways we can do things. Maybe there's more efficiency. It's always like thinking about everywhere you go, how can you leave that better than you found it, right? And that's how we all find hope. And hopefully that was a good, you know, sort of like gives you guys hope in terms of launching your careers and finding a great path.
And it's been a great session, Yesenia Bello. Thank you so much for being part of my course. And in the name of my students, we really appreciate the time.
Thank
and we'll
you.
see you. We'll see you soon.
Yes, definitely. Find me on LinkedIn, and if I could ever do anything for you, please let me know. I love networking. I love mentoring, and if you guys ever need anything, another ear, I'm here for you. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Bye, Yesenia.
Thank you. Bye, everybody. Take care. Bye.
Thank you.
Good job.